Welcome back, my friends. Settle in and enjoy the stories. Nothing here will wake you. Sleep well. At 2:13 in the morning, our probe line stopped at the 180-foot mark, although the camera showed its brass weight hanging 40 feet above the mine's only documented bottom. When we hauled it back, a fresh bowline was tied around the weight, wet with Elena Marlowe's blood and threaded through the watch she had been wearing when she disappeared. No rescuer had entered the shaft. Then Elena's voice came through our disconnected field phone. She said, "Don't pull again. They count whoever holds the line." Within minutes, Caleb's name came through the dead wire and an 8th tally mark began cutting itself into the bulkhead. 14 hours earlier, Elena was only overdue. My name is Daniel Mercer. I had been a park ranger at Wrangell St. Elias for 12 years and carried an abandoned mine qualification. But I was not a mining engineer. I knew how to test air, recognize failing timber, establish a continuous route to daylight, and refuse an underground rescue without a backup team. That last rule matters. Elena Marlowe was a 35-year-old industrial archaeologist working under a park permit. She was documenting tool marks and survey hardware in a small copper prospect above the Kennecott Valley, listed in our files as the North Vein No. 4 adit. Reaching it required a rough vehicle approach, a hike through alder, and a final climb along an abandoned tram bench. The mine was supposed to be simple. One horizontal adit ran a little more than 600 feet to a vertical winze, with 3 documented stations and a bottom at 180 feet. Elena's permit limited her to the main adit and first side drift. She was not authorized to descend the winze or remove a closure. Her check-in schedule was noon and 6. At noon, she reported a stable portal, normal oxygen, no toxic gas, and fresh moisture on one timber set. Her personal monitor also paired correctly with the recovery receiver carried by park teams during underground work. Her second transmission came at 4:47, more than an hour before the next required check-in. Dispatch recorded it automatically. Elena sounded calm, but she was speaking more slowly than usual. "I found a survey mark behind the inner bulkhead," she said. "White chalk. It says -5. The dispatcher asked whether she had passed the permitted limit. "Negative. I'm at the bulkhead. Somebody has taken down the centerboard and put it back loose." The dispatcher told her to leave the mine and wait outside. There were several seconds of silence. Then Elena said, "I can hear a shift bell below me." That was the end of the recording. At 6, she did not answer. By 6:25, I was loading rescue equipment with Ranger Tessa Lynn and Caleb Rusk, a maintenance specialist familiar with the historic mine structures. Low ceilings had grounded local helicopter operations, and rain was moving up the valley. We could not wait for morning without confirming whether Elena was injured inside. The drive ended where the old tram road had washed into a steep drainage. We carried rope bags, medical gear, a 4-gas monitor, a thermal camera, a field telephone, an intrinsically safe LED light, and 250 feet of marked probe line. Caleb brought a non-sparking brass plumb weight, heavy enough to keep the line straight without striking sparks from old steel. Wind came off the glaciers with a dry edge. Far below, braided channels of the Kennecott River lay pale with silt, while the mountains vanished into cloud one ridge at a time. Loose shale shifted under our boots. Elena's vehicle stood at the end of the bench road. It was locked. Her rain shell and satellite messenger were gone, which meant she had carried them. A paper cup sat upright on the hood, half full of coffee diluted by condensation. The surface had formed a thin skin. She had expected to return before it cooled. Her boot prints began beside the vehicle and followed the tram bench toward the portal. No second set accompanied them. The soil was dark enough to preserve the edges, and the pattern in her soles matched the spare boots we found behind the driver's seat. She had walked in at a normal pace. There were no slips, running strides, or abrupt turns. Near the portal, the tracks changed. The old adit opened behind a timber frame set into green-black rock. A steel gate normally covered the entrance. Elena had unlocked it with her permit key, and the chain hung correctly through one side. 10 feet outside the gate, her right boot had pressed deeply into damp gravel. The next visible impression lay just inside the portal, where the floor was dry. Between those two prints, someone had drawn 7 parallel lines across the ground. They were not scraped with a boot. Each line was narrow and even, as if made by the point of a metal tool. The marks crossed the full width of the entrance and continued beneath both gateposts. Rainwater had collected in them, although the dirt around them remained dry. Caleb crouched without touching anything. "These cut under the frame," he said. The gateposts had been installed decades earlier. For fresh marks to continue beneath them, either someone had removed and replaced the entire portal structure, or the lines had been in the ground before the posts were set. The water inside them said neither explanation was true. The recovery receiver in Tessa's pack sounded an alarm. Elena's monitor had appeared on the display for the first time since her final call. Its oxygen reading was 17.4% and falling. 3 weak whistle blasts, the standard underground distress signal, came from behind the gate. We now had a live subject in a deteriorating atmosphere. Retreating to wait for the full team meant leaving Elena below until she could no longer help herself. Metal struck rock 3 times inside the mine. A flat iron bell rang once, and the impacts stopped in the middle of their rhythm. We photographed the marks and checked the portal air. Oxygen held at 20.9%. Carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, and combustible gas all read 0. Air moved outward from the mine in a steady cold current. Caleb fixed our first guideline anchor outside the gate and placed a numbered metal tag where anyone entering could see it. The 3 of us went in. Our headlamps reduced the mine to a series of wet surfaces. The drift was wide enough to walk upright, but too narrow for us to travel shoulder to shoulder. Copper staining spread blue and green across sections of wall. Rusted rail ties remained in the floor, their iron rails removed long ago. Water ticked from the ceiling at irregular intervals. The air smelled of mineral damp, old wood, and the sharp metal odor that comes when disturbed rock meets moisture. Elena had placed reflective survey targets every 20 feet. Each target carried a distance in black marker. The first 4 matched my laser rangefinder within inches. The 5th did not. It was labeled 100 feet. The laser measured 117 feet from the portal. We checked twice. Caleb walked back to the previous marker and measured the space between them. The labels said 20 feet. His laser said 37. "She could have moved it," Tessa said. Caleb examined the adhesive. Dust around the target was undisturbed. A clean square beneath it showed where the target had been since Elena placed it. Moving it would have left a second clean patch. We continued. At the next target, the discrepancy disappeared. The label said 120 feet. My rangefinder read 120 feet from the portal. The missing 17 feet had not been added to the whole tunnel. They existed only between 2 markers. That was the first point when the mine stopped feeling abandoned. An abandoned place is empty. The drift around us felt occupied by a process we had interrupted. We found Elena's equipment case near the first side drift. She had set it against the wall and opened it neatly. Spare batteries remained in their foam slots. A camera lens lay capped beside a notebook. Her handwriting filled the final 3 pages with measurements, sketches, and short observations. The earlier entries were professional. Moisture line on north rib. Recent movement at third timber set. Copper carbonate on waste pile. The final page was different. The first sentence read, "The distance changes when the light moves." Beneath it, she had drawn the main drift as a straight line crossed by survey stations. Between the 80-foot and 100-foot targets, she had added a narrow loop. The loop was labeled 17 feet. A second note said, "It closes when both markers remain visible." Tessa set the LED floodlight to its low inspection mode so both reflectors and the wall between them were visible. I measured again. The distance was 20 feet. A tall shadow beside the farther marker had no object casting it. As the floodlight brightened, the shadow lost its depth and flattened against the rock. She turned her head toward me. Her breath made a pale cloud in the cold beam. Caleb switched off his lamp and covered the glow from his meter. I kept both reflectors inside my headlamp beam. The measurement remained 20 feet. Then I aimed away until the farther target vanished into darkness. Something shifted beyond us. It was not the sharp crack of falling rock. It was a long, low drag, like a timber being pulled across a floor. When I brought the laser back, the range between the targets read 37 feet. We did not test it again. Elena's notebook contained 2 photographs. The first showed the inner bulkhead with -5 written across its center board. E. Below it, Elena had copied 7 names. The second photograph showed a corroded signal chart. 1 bell meant stop, 2 meant lower, 3 meant raise, and continuous ringing meant danger, and close the shift until a foreman cleared it. Elena had circled the final instruction without explaining why. Tessa recognized one surname. Owen Pike appeared in a scanned payroll ledger from the Historic District Archive. She had helped Elena move boxes during an inventory the previous winter. Caleb remembered the same file for a different reason. A maintenance memo attached to the ledger warned that several pages from the North Vein prospect should not be used to verify employment claims, because the company had denied operating a night shift there. How many men were on the page? I asked. Caleb looked at the 7 names Elena had copied. I don't remember. From deeper in the mine, metal struck rock once. The sound traveled cleanly through the drift. It had the hard ring of a hand tool, not a collapse. After a pause, it came again. Then a third time. The old bell rang once. The next impact began, then stopped as if the tool had been caught in mid-swing. We called Elena's name. No one answered. The inner bulkhead stood another 200 feet ahead. Along the way, we found more of her targets. Some gave correct distances. Others added short sections that disappeared when 2 reflectors remained illuminated. Elena had begun connecting the markers with a thin braided survey cord. She looped it through eye screws and kept it taut at knee height. Wherever that cord remained under tension, our measurements held. At one station, the cord entered the wall. There was no crack or drilled hole. The white braid touched solid greenstone and continued through it, as cleanly as thread passing through cloth. Caleb ran a gloved finger around the contact point. The rock was cold and seamless. When he gave the cord a gentle pull, something pulled back. He released it immediately. 3 strikes answered from far below. Tessa marked the location. I wanted to hold there until the full technical team arrived. We had already found unstable geometry none of us could assess. Then Elena whistled again from beyond the bulkhead. I answered with one long blast. The reply was weaker. 3 short notes, followed by a cough. The bulkhead had been built across the drift with heavy planks, leaving a narrow inspection opening at shoulder height. The centerboard from Elena's photograph leaned against the wall. Dust covered its outer face except where gloved fingers had recently handled it. On the interface, scratched into the wood, were 7 vertical tally marks. -5 remained written in chalk across the gap. No way got or done to do. Beyond the boards, the main drift ended at the winds. An old timber collar framed a black opening in the floor. According to every map, 3 stations branched from the vertical shaft. The lowest station and the bottom lay 180 feet beneath us. No 5th station existed. We called again. Elena did not answer, but the 3-blast whistle came from below. Caleb inspected the collar while Tessa prepared the medical and haul systems. I installed a second anchor, then paid out fresh 2-conductor wire toward the portal. The cable would let the winds team speak with the entrance, even if rock blocked our radios. Tessa verified both handsets with a short test lead, then left the 2 portal conductors loose beside my boot. She would connect them after walking back outside. We lowered a thermal camera first. Its cable reached the bottom without showing a person. The shaft walls were rough, crossed by old timbers and short openings at the documented stations. Temperature decreased gradually. At 180 feet, the image showed broken rock and black water. There was no passage below it. Elena whistled again. This time, the sound did not come from the shaft. It came through the field telephone receiver in my hand. The cable to the portal was not connected yet. I lifted the receiver slowly. Static moved across the line, although neither free end touched a power source. Beneath it, a woman drew a shallow breath. "Elena?" I said. The static stopped. 7 voices spoke together. They said my full name. Caleb took the receiver from me and dropped it onto the planks. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The only sound was water tapping the timbers below us. We backed away from the collar and completed the field phone connection without touching the receiver again. Tessa walked back to the portal to establish radio contact with the incoming team. Caleb and I stayed at the bulkhead, anchored to separate lines. We agreed to lower the brass probe weight, test the bottom physically, and withdraw. We would not descend until additional personnel arrived. The marked line passed over a pulley at the collar. Caleb controlled the reel while I watched the shaft. The brass weight dropped smoothly. At 60 feet, it passed the first station. At 110, the second. At 150, the third. The thermal camera showed it hanging in open air at every point. At 180 feet, the line stopped. The weight had not reached the rubble visible on camera. It hung almost 40 feet above the bottom, turning slowly in empty space. The rope remained taut. Nothing touched it. Then the line moved sideways. On the camera, the weight drifted toward a section of solid wall. The brass cylinder reached the rock and passed through without resistance. The rope followed until it disappeared into stone. Caleb locked the reel. From inside the wall, someone pulled 3 times. We should have left the line in place and withdrawn. Instead, I asked Caleb to recover it. I told myself Elena might have reached it through an undocumented opening. If she had attached a note, a light, or any sign of her condition, that information could determine whether we waited or entered. The reel turned harder than before. Its counter remained frozen at 180 feet, while 52 feet of additional line came back wet with reddish mud that did not exist anywhere in the shaft. Then the tension released, and the counter began decreasing normally. The brass weight emerged from the wall and began rising through the camera frame. At 2:13 in the morning, we halted over the collar. A bowline had been tied through the eye. Elena's watch was trapped inside the knot. The glass was broken. Blood filled the seam where the band met the case. Its hands had stopped at 2:13. The field phone rang. Caleb stared at the receiver. Tessa had disconnected the portal end before leaving to meet the incoming team. Both loose copper conductors lay on the floor beside my boot. The phone rang a second time. I answered. Don't pull again, Elena said. Her voice was thin and close. They count whoever holds the line. 7 pickaxes struck rock behind her. Where are you? I asked. Below the bottom. My meter says 16.8. My left leg is pinned. Her breathing scratched against the microphone. I could hear water near her, but it did not drip. It flowed with the steady rush of a small stream. Can you see the probe line? Not now. It came through the roof. I tied my watch to it so you would know it reached me. Caleb looked toward the thermal monitor. The brass weight had passed through a vertical wall 40 feet above the shaft bottom. Wherever Elena was, the line had entered her space from above. Keep your survey cord tight, she said. Light both ends before you move. If they ask your name, do not answer. The connection filled with a soft mechanical hum. A man's voice said, Caleb Rusk. Caleb did not respond. The voice repeated his name with the slow patience of someone reading from a list. Behind it, the picks stopped. The absence of those impacts was worse than the sound. I could hear several people breathing around Elena. Do not answer, she whispered. The phone went dead. I called Tessa on the park radio. She had met the lead rescuers near the portal, reconnected the hardline, and reached the duty officer through a portable repeater. A 6-person technical team was climbing from the road. Their estimated arrival at the mine was 90 minutes. I reported Elena's oxygen reading and injury. Tessa told us to withdraw from the collar and wait. She was right. 2 rescuers did not enter a changing mine beneath an unsupported shaft. We needed redundant anchors, a haul team, medical oxygen, and people who could extract us if the route failed. Caleb reached for the probe line to secure it as evidence. The reel spun. The handle struck his wrist, then his forearm. He fell against the bulkhead while rope tore across the pulley. I dropped the radio, caught the brake lever with both hands, and felt the line pulling downward with enough force to lift my boots against the collar. The 7 tally marks on the loose board deepened. Fresh splinters curled from them, one after another. The 7th mark stopped growing. An 8th line began beside it. I released the brake before the pull could drag me into the shaft. Rope vanished over the edge. The reel emptied in seconds. Its bitter end snapped through the guide and disappeared below. At the same moment, the roof failed behind us. The first sound was a dry click above the main drift. Caleb looked up. A timber cap split along its center, and a slab of greenstone dropped between us and the bulkhead. More rock followed. Dust struck our lamps and turned the beams white. I pulled Caleb toward the winds as the passage filled from floor to ceiling. When the movement stopped, our route to the portal was gone. The field phone wire and guideline still ran through the collapse, but neither gave us a space large enough to crawl. Caleb had a deep cut above his wrist and could not close his right hand. I splinted the arm, controlled the bleeding, and checked his breathing. Dust had raised the carbon monoxide reading slightly, but oxygen remained safe on our side. Tessa reached us through the hardline. She had heard the collapse and was already directing the incoming team to bring cribbing and hydraulic spreaders. She ordered us to stay clear of the fall. Then my atmospheric meter sounded a different alarm. It was not measuring our air. Elena's remote channel had returned through the rock. Her oxygen had fallen to 15.9%. At that concentration, judgment deteriorates. Coordination follows. A person with an injured leg already cold and exhausted could lose consciousness quickly. I told Tessa I was preparing to descend. She said no before I finished the sentence. We argued for less than a minute. She had command, protocol, and common sense on her side. I had a live telemetry reading and a victim we could hear weakening beneath us. The backup team still had nearly an hour of climbing. Reaching Elena did not require me to bring her out immediately. I could give her oxygen, free her leg, and establish a line for the main team. That was how I justified it. The truth is that the watch had changed the decision for me. Elena had found our line inside a place that did not connect to the shaft. She had used the only object on her body that carried a precise time. She had not sent a plea. She had sent proof and instructions. Waiting while her air failed felt less like caution than abandonment. Caleb could belay with his left hand and the mechanical descender. Tessa remained on the hard line. I took the 200-foot rescue rope, Elena's spare reflector targets, the laser rangefinder, a compact oxygen cylinder, and the lead floodlight with its reserve battery. I anchored the new rope to 2 independent timbers and tied its end to the guideline that still reached the portal. Whatever happened below, one continuous path would remain connected to daylight. "Do not say my name over the line," I told Tessa. She did not ask why. I crossed the collar and descended. The first 3 stations matched the map. Die. Rusted rails ended at narrow drifts. Water shone on old lagging. At each station I placed a reflector where Caleb could see it through the thermal camera, measured the distance, and read the value without identifying myself. At 180 feet, I expected rubble. My boots passed through the image of it. I felt no impact. One moment my lamp showed broken stone and black water beneath me. The next, my legs entered cold mist. The rubble remained visible around my waist like a reflection on a dark surface. When I lowered farther, it slid above my helmet and became a ceiling. Beneath it, the winds continued. "Stop," Caleb said through the headset. "I have you at 158 feet. The rope mark beside my descender read 206. I told him the 2 numbers without using either of our names. He checked the reel. According to the amount of rope that had left our bag, my reading was correct. According to the thermal image and the shaft markers, I was 48 feet higher. The mine had not stretched the rope. It had created 2 different answers for where the rope was. My park radio clicked against my chest. Signal strength showed full bars, stronger than it had been near the portal. A dispatcher I did not recognize called a sequence of names. Each one matched Elena's notebook. After every name, a man answered, "Present." The 7th name was Owen Pike. 7 picks struck below me. Then the dispatcher called Elena Marlowe. No one answered. The voice called again. I continued down without speaking. At 231 feet, my lamp found a horizontal opening. White chalk on the timber beside it read -5 Terra. I locked my descender and examined the station. The floor looked dry, but a shallow stream ran along its center, flowing uphill toward the rock face. Elena's survey cord crossed the opening at knee height. It was taut enough to hum when the air moved. On the far wall, 2 reflective targets shone back at me. I measured the distance between them. 20 feet. I stepped into the drift and kept both targets illuminated until my rope carried my full weight sideways. When I turned my lamp toward the darkness ahead, a new reflector appeared 37 feet away. Something moved between us. It had the outline of a man bent beneath a low roof. A round lamp burned on its forehead, but the flame gave no light. The figure raised a pick over one shoulder. Its arms seemed too long only when it moved. When it stopped, its proportions looked ordinary again. The pick came down. The impact traveled through the floor and into my boots. 6 more lamps opened farther down the drift. The figures did not rush me. They turned toward the wall and worked. 7 picks rose. 7 picks fell. None of them broke stone away. With each impact, the wall extended several inches into the drift, pushing darkness ahead of it. They were not excavating a tunnel. They were adding distance. I kept my lamp on Elena's reflectors and moved along the taut cord. The workers remained at the edge of my vision. Whenever both markers shone, their picks struck without gaining ground. When one reflector slipped behind my shoulder, the nearest lamp appeared several feet closer. Elena had been right. Measurement did not hurt them. It limited what the mind could change. I found her in a side chamber where old timber shelves lined one wall. She sat on the floor with her back against a post, holding her laser in one hand and a rescue whistle in the other. Her left ankle was trapped beneath a fallen cap timber. Blood darkened her sock. A portable lamp aimed past her shoulder kept two reflectors shining across the entrance. Her face changed when she saw me, but she did not say my name. "You brought a line?" she asked. I showed her the rope attached to my harness. "Is it still tight?" I tested it. Tension came back from the shaft. Only then did she lower the whistle. While I assessed her leg, she told me what had happened. After her last transmission, she had obeyed the dispatcher and started toward the portal. The shift bell rang below the bulkhead. Then someone whistled 3 times from the winds. She assumed another person had entered through an undocumented opening and become injured. She removed the loose center board, anchored her survey cord, and approached the shaft. The 5th station had appeared beneath the documented bottom exactly as it had for me. Her line stayed connected to the bulkhead until the voices began calling names. The first 7 came from the old payroll ledger. The 8th was hers. She had answered automatically. The second I said yes, my cord went slack, she whispered. The shaft turned into a corridor. They left this for me. She pointed to a leather tally tag on the floor. It was black with age, shaped like a narrow leaf, and punched at one end. 7 names had been impressed into the leather. Below them was a blank 8th line. Elena had spent hours measuring her way back toward the shaft. The mine changed whenever both ends of a segment fell into darkness. Keeping 2 reflectors visible prevented it from adding distance between them. Keeping the cord taut preserved a route, but only until something on the other end pulled harder. "The probe line came through the ceiling after my main battery failed," she said. "I thought you had found me. When I tied the watch, the line moved upward. Then they started calling your names. My oxygen cylinder had enough gas to help her think clearly, not enough to supply her through a long extraction. I placed the mask over her face and built a simple 3-to-1 haul using the rescue rope, 2 pulleys, and a prusik as a progress capture. The same system we used to move an injured climber could lift one end of the timber. Elena clipped the rope while I built the anchor. She knew the equipment and checked every connection without being asked. The nearest pick stopped striking. A man stood beyond the reflector line. His clothes resembled heavy canvas darkened by water. Copper dust coated his hands. Above his collar, the lamp flame occupied the place where a face should have been. He held his pick horizontally and extended it toward me, handle first. The gesture was almost polite. The radio on my chest used Tessa's voice. "Daniel Mercer, confirm status." I knew not to answer. I also knew Tessa had been waiting for an update after the collapse. Habit won before fear could stop it. "Go ahead," I said. The 8th blank line on the leather tag filled with my name. The survey rope behind me went slack. My headset filled with a burst of voices, then silence. I pulled on the rope. Instead of leading toward the shaft, it emerged from the chamber wall 6 feet to my left, crossed the floor, and entered the opposite wall. Both sections were tied to my harness. The continuous route to daylight had become a closed loop around solid rock. The reflector at the chamber entrance went dark. All 7 workers turned toward us. I switched the LED floodlight to its emergency full output mode. White light filled the chamber and flattened every shadow. the same effect we had seen near the first side drift. The workers lost their depth. They became dark impressions in the rock, like human forms pressed behind a thin skin of stone. Their lamps remained visible, 7 dull circles arranged at head height. Elena looked at the old leather tag, then at a rusted wire running along the ceiling. "The bell," she said. The wire passed through ceramic guides toward the main drift. It matched the signal chart Elena had photographed. A continuous bell meant danger and closed the shift until a foreman cleared it. The isolated strikes we had heard were not calling the workers down. They were keeping the shift open. I clipped the floodlight beneath the timber shelf where it covered both entrance reflectors. At full output, the reserve battery would last less than 10 minutes. Elena took the free end of the survey cord and clipped it to the signal wire. She tested the connection with one sharp pull. A bell rang somewhere above us. Every pick stopped. The dark impressions inside the wall turned their lamps toward the sound. We lifted the cap timber. The rope system creaked, and the prusik smoked against its sheath, but Elena pulled her leg free. She could not bear full weight. I shortened the oxygen cylinder strap across her body and put her right arm over my shoulder. She kept one hand on the survey cord. "Keep it ringing," I said. She began a continuous series of pulls. The bell answered through the mine. Its tone was flat and iron-heavy, without echo. Each time it rang, the workers remained inside the walls. Between rings, their hands pressed outward. Copper-colored fingers appeared beneath the stone surface and sank back when the next sound came. We moved one measured segment at a time. I placed a reflector ahead, kept the previous one visible, and read the distance. Elena advanced the cord and rang the bell. When she needed both hands to cross broken ground, I stopped moving and held the light steady. The system was slow. It was also something the mine could not predict. We were not following its corridor. We were rebuilding our own route inside it. At the third station, the floodlight began to dim behind us. Shadows thickened around the reflectors. The workers stepped out of the walls one at a time. They no longer carried picks. Each held a length of rope. The ropes were tied in bowlines. One loop contained Elena's broken watch. Another held Caleb's blood-stained glove. The third carried a metal park tag stamped with my unit number. The objects were real enough to swing as the figures walked, but the watch was still secured to our recovered probe weight above. Caleb's glove had been on his injured hand when I left him. My unit tag was fixed to the guideline anchor at the portal. The mine was showing us the evidence it intended to send back. Elena stumbled. The bell stopped. The nearest worker crossed 10 measured feet without taking a step. His blank face tilted toward me, and a voice came from inside his lamp. "Daniel Mercer." I did not answer. "Elena Marlowe." She pulled the signal cord. The bell rang. The figure flattened against the wall hard enough to leave the outline of its rope behind. We reached the place where my rescue line entered the rock. Under full light, there was no opening, but the rope still passed through. I clipped the laser to a reflector, aimed it along the line, and received a return from somewhere beyond the wall. The display read 180 feet. The same number as the wind's bottom. Elena understood before I did. The line had not been cut or looped. The mine had folded our route until the shaft and chamber shared the same measured point. That was how the probe weight had reached her. The bow line was not proof that the line descended farther than the map. It was proof that for a few seconds 2 places had occupied the same distance from daylight. We could not climb through solid rock. We could make it repeat the intersection. Well, I moved one reflector to the point where the rope entered the wall. Elena placed another at the opposite contact point. We tightened the survey cord between them and illuminated both. The laser read 17 feet. She pulled the bell wire continuously. I turned off my headlamp. Darkness closed over everything except the two red reflector points and the failing floodlight behind us. The laser reading changed from 17 feet to 0. The wall between the reflectors opened into the winds. Caleb's lamp shone above us. According to my eyes, he was more than 200 feet overhead. According to the rope, he was 180 feet away. According to his shocked voice in my headset, less than a foot of rock had separated us a moment before. I connected Elena to the haul line and gave 3 pulls. Raise. The technical team had reached the collar after cribbing a narrow passage through the collapse. Tessa answered with 3 pulls. The rope tightened, lifting Elena from my shoulder. The workers came out of the lower drift. There were 7 of them when they crossed the first reflector. At the second, an 8th lamp ignited behind the others. I clipped my ascenders onto the rope below Elena. The team hauled while I climbed. She rose through the intersection first. For 1 second, her body seemed divided by the surface of the shaft bottom. Then the rubble flexed like black water and let her pass. A rope loop closed around my left ankle. The pull from below tore one ascender loose and slammed my helmet against the wall. Sound disappeared from my left ear. I hung beneath the false bottom with the workers gathering below me. Their 8 lamps formed a vertical line in the shaft. The loop was tied to the leather tally tag. Elena saw it from above. Instead of continuing toward safety, she locked her ascender and lowered herself until she could reach the survey cord clipped to my harness. She cut the cord behind the tag, then pulled the signal wire as hard as she could. The bell gave 1 final strike. The loop loosened. I kicked free and climbed. The haul team dragged both of us through the false bottom. The moment my boots cleared it, the view below returned to ordinary rubble and black water. The lower shaft, the 5th station, and the 8 lamps vanished. Our rescue rope remained taut against the stones. Something below pulled once. Then the line went slack. The extraction from the mine took another 4 hours. Elena had a fractured ankle, dehydration, and symptoms consistent with prolonged low oxygen. Caleb required surgery for 2 broken bones in his wrist. I had concussion and permanent high-frequency hearing loss on my left side. None of us had carbon monoxide or drugs in our blood. Elena's monitor stored every atmospheric reading. Its clock showed that she had spent almost 9 hours below the documented bottom, although the thermal camera never recorded a passage there. The official investigation lasted most of the winter. Engineers entered the mine after the collapse was stabilized. They measured the main adit, every side drift, and the full winds. All distances matched the historic map. The 5th station did not exist. At 180 feet, the shaft ended in rubble above a flooded sump. Core drilling found continuous rock beneath it. Our equipment created harder problems. Video and the reel counter showed 180 feet deployed before the weight entered the wall. Recovery produced 232 feet between the reel and weight. The unexplained 52-foot section carried reddish clay that did not match the mine. Laboratory analysis identified copper, iron, and organic fibers too degraded to classify. Elena's watch remained tied to the weight. The bowline contained her blood beneath the outer wrap, proving it had been tied after her hand was cut. Investigators tried to reconstruct a way she could have reached the rope through a crack or side opening. They found none. The field phone recording was dismissed as electrical contamination. That explanation appeared in the final report even though the phone had no battery and both conductors were disconnected when Elena called. The audio specialist isolated 8 separate breathing patterns beneath her voice. 7 continued at the same rhythm. The 8th matched mine only after I answered the call from the radio. Investigators interviewed Elena and me separately. Neither of us saw the other's notes. We drew the same fifth station, the same uphill stream, and the same chamber dimensions within a foot. We placed all 7 workers in the same order. The only difference was the 8th figure. I drew it behind the others. Elena drew an empty lamp directly over my shoulder. Those diagrams were removed from the public case file before either of us signed our statements. Caleb's account was reduced to auditory confusion caused by pain, although he had named all 7 payroll entries before the archive page was found. Elena returned to the archive the following spring. In a box filed under equipment disputes, she found the missing payroll page Caleb remembered. 7 men were listed for the North Vane night crew. Below their names was an 8th blank line. A supervisor had written one sentence across the margin. Do not complete the lower tally. Close the shift with the danger bell and leave the name unanswered. There was no accident report attached. No family claims. No map showing a lower drift. The 7 men disappeared from company records after that week. The park sealed the North Vane portal with reinforced concrete. Public documents described unstable ground, deteriorated timber, and hazardous air. Those statements were true. They were not the reason the concrete extended 30 feet into the adit, or why the old signal wire was cut into sections before burial. Elena recovered, but she never worked alone underground again. She also refused to wear a watch. Caleb transferred out of mine stabilization. I stayed with the park. Leaving would not change what happened, and I did not want the next ranger entering an abandoned working without someone who understood why a taut line mattered. For months I could not step into an elevator without watching the floor indicator and counting the distance between levels. Dispatch also changed one procedure at my request. Underground teams now authenticate by unit number and a rotating code, never by answering a full name. The written reason is voice interference in confined spaces. Only 4 of us know what that wording replaced. My hearing never fully returned. In quiet rooms, my left ear produces a faint metallic tone. An audiologist calls it trauma-related tinnitus. Most days it is continuous. At 2:13 in the morning, it sometimes breaks into 7 evenly spaced strikes. We kept the brass weight, watch, phone, and leather tag in a locked evidence cabinet at headquarters. The tag still carries the 7 old names. The line where mine appeared faded after we reached the surface, leaving only a shallow groove. Last November, I completed the annual property inventory alone. The field phone was listed for disposal, so I removed it from the cabinet and set it on my desk. Its battery compartment was empty. The cable had been cut flush with the housing. I signed the form at 2:13 in the afternoon. The receiver rang once. It paused, then rang 7 more times. That's all for tonight. Let the forest fade, let the radios fall silent, and leave every unanswered thing where it belongs. In the darkness, far beyond your door. Thank you for listening to The Insomniac. Rest easy, sleep deeply, and wherever you are, good night.